All right. Welcome to episode 53 of the Jake Blanchard podcast. As always, we're brought to you in part by Fellowship Brand, premium men's grooming products. While you're listening, click over to fellowshipbrand.com. Check out their oils, balms, butters, and so much more for the hair on your face. Code JBP at checkout gets you 10% off your order. My guest today is Dr. Kizzy Parks. She's the president of K.Parks Consulting, KPC, is a firm whose mission is to make clients thrive by providing training and curriculum development services, IT support, and executive coaching and leadership development. Kizzy started KPC after immediately receiving her PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from Florida Institute of Technology. She's got over 50 team members. They work across the world. They partner with Fortune 500 companies, universities, government agencies, and, you know, some big bats like the U.S. Army, U.S. Department of Education, Agriculture, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the U.S. Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division. Holy smokes. She's been in 75 publications or so, and has a book called Managing Diversity in the Military, The Value of Inclusion in a Culture of Uniformity. So I'm looking forward to unpacking all of this and more. Kizzy, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me, Jake. I appreciate it.
Hey, you've got a lot going on, like a lot. There's a lot. You know, I always get excited about doing these intros, and then like sometimes there's just some people just absolutely blow my mind with all the things that they've done or that they're building or do. So like, let's learn a little bit about you. Like, where are you from? And kind of take us on a logical arc here about how you got a PhD in psychology and industrial and organizational psychology.
So I'm originally from Michigan.
Okay.
From the west side of the great state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And, when I was a kid, I always knew that I was going to become an entrepreneur, as well as I always knew I was going to get a PhD in psychology. Like when I was little, like first grade, second grade, like I knew these things. Like I just knew it. Like I was always helping all the kids in the neighborhood or want to protect the kid that people would bully. And then I was always thinking of ways to make money. So I would like sell batteries to my brothers who were much older than me.
Yeah.
It's just like a lot of things like that.
So you're just industrious at an early age, and then also just being a connector. You're interested, emotionally interested in others. Sounds
Yes.
like.
Yes. Always have been like that.
Okay. And so you continued down that trajectory of entrepreneurship and deepening relationships. And how'd you find yourself in university?
Well, like I said, I always knew. So I went to undergrad at Alfred University for the bachelor's in psychology.
Okay.
And at that time, I learned about industrial organizational psychology because I had the, pleasure and unique experience of actually having a clinical client. So I had a course where I had a client and I was very, very unhappy. It was really stressful having one client. And I thought, well, my dreams of being a therapist, those are crushed. I'm not going to do that. I don't really like it. So what is this industrial organizational psychology stuff all about? And I took a course, fell in love with it, and went on to graduate school at Florida Institute of Technology and ended up earning a master's degree. And then I took 2 years off, and then I reapplied and got into their PhD program.
And what is industrial and organizational psychology, if you mind peeling back a couple layers?
Of course, because it sounds so much more than what it is. I mean, it's really just applying the principles and theories of psychology to the workplace. So in my opinion, it's the greatest field because I've always loved the world of work and I'm an entrepreneur and I love psychology. So it entails things like if you've ever applied for a job and you're like, why are they asking me these questions? Why do I have to complete this test? So chances are an industrial organizational psychologist created that kind of a test. Or you work in a company and maybe they have you take that employee voices of employee annual employee survey, or you have to go through training. And so IO psychologists are typically responsible for many of the different things in the workplace to just help make them better.
Absolutely. And so you got a breadth and depth of education in this very specific field. And then you said, hey, well, I'm going to bring my skills to the open market. And what was that like? Did you start as an entrepreneur right away? Or did you work with another firm and then decide like, hey, I've got to scratch this itch for entrepreneurship? What was that like?
Like, I thought that's what it's going to be, like scratching the itch. Like, I thought it was going to be like, okay, I'm going to go work for a firm. And then like 20 years later, I'll go out on my own. Or for a small fraction of my life, I thought I was going to become like a full-time online college professor or just a full-time professor and then consult on the side and earn extra money. Well, neither happened. So I literally was a graduate research fellow at now Patrick Space Force in Central Florida. And the last month that I was there, the director of research said, I heard you're graduating soon. I would really like to keep you on as a contractor. And so prior to that, I was involved in a lot of like 1099 opportunities. So one of the schools I taught for, I was 1099. I would analyze data for consulting firms. I helped with a structured interview kind of set up for a different firm. So I had this experience as a solopreneur. And so when I was presented with this opportunity, I decided to run with it and to build it out. And so I incorporated about 5 months after that and decided, hey, I'm just going to run with this. I was given this opportunity. I'm going to create a business. And so I just grew from there.
That's awesome. And then along the way, like what are some of the kind of bumps in the road that one who professes industrial and organizational psychology runs into in the, I don't know, the process of acquiring clients? I mean, are these things that a lot of organizations are looking for and you're responding to RFPs? Or are you going out and kind of cold calling and saying, hey, what are you doing about your employees? What are you doing about the environment in which they work in? Like, what do you need?
I had no idea like how to acquire clients. Like I really had no idea. And so the biggest road bump was just not knowing. And so what I ended up doing was, due to the relationship at now Patrick Space Force, I ended up gaining exposure to Army Reserves, National Guard, Office of Personnel Management. And they would see something in me. And they're like, there's something you have that we need. And it for instance, I spoke at like a the Women's History Month event at Fort Belvoir. I trained reservists because of my background in diversity and inclusion. For another organization, they liked the fact that I incorporated assessments into my training. So I started to then learn, oh, wow, here's the value I'm bringing. My expertise in diversity and inclusion, my knowledge around analytics. Apparently they like how I facilitate. So I was also learning. And then on the flip side of that, I created a relationship with a firm who had Fortune 500 clients. And so I worked underneath them. So they had the marketing, they had the experience, they had all the connections. And so I just fit the bill as PhD data person here to help. And so through that, I ended up working with like TIAA-CREF, with universities, with way big organizations, because they had those inroads and all the processes and procedures in place to obtain those kind of clients. So that was a huge, huge barrier. But I would say the biggest one that took a long time just to unpack was really understanding how and why and that mindset behind the government buyer. Because I didn't know, right? I had no idea. It was, hey, we want to keep you on, because we heard you're graduating soon, and maybe somebody heard me speak and they were like, yeah, we would love for you to speak here. But I didn't understand the business side and the government's mindset and how you really understand and interpret a request for proposal. So that took a long time to really unpack.
Yeah, and there's, and excuse my ignorance in this area, but I believe I've heard that there are provisions in government contracting where, like, they try to give a percentage of business to smaller, independent type businesses. Is that a fair statement, or am I misinformed there?
No, I mean, it's definitely a fair statement that most of the agencies, they have a target, but um, but even so, the target is low in the grand scheme of things, and one organization may meet many of the requirements, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a small business, woman-owned, minority, or small business, service disabled, they're going to check many boxes. So it's kind of, for some, it's, oh, well, we met the requirement, right? Like,
Yeah.
that was nice. So it's like, well, okay, you met the requirement. So I guess what, you're not going to work with me. And so it's this interesting kind of situation. That's why I really focus on understanding the government mindset and really unpacking what they will really want in their requests for proposals and sources soughts and requests for information.
Okay. And then so your ecosystem around these two different things is your KPC consulting firm, and then you also have another firm called Govcon Winners. And what's the difference between the two organizations?
Yeah. So K.Parks KPC, KPC and I have these things called joint ventures. So we have over $50 million in government contracts. And so for KPC, we are delivering services primarily to the federal government and actively bidding on work for and to the federal government. So that, and it encompasses a lot of areas: training, inspection, staffing, sometimes products every now and again. So that's what's going on that side. And for Govcon Winners, I discovered, especially when the app Clubhouse started to take off, that there are a lot of people that claim to be able to help people get government contracts that may not have really ever had a government contract, or maybe their biggest government contract was $100,000, which is still a lot. I mean, it's a lot of money, but there's a way big difference between a $100,000 contract and a $10 million contract. So I realized that there was a lot of people selling these services and selling this training, and I was really taken aback because I would come across people who paid for it, and I was like, whoa, what are they teaching you? So I decided to start Govcon Winners because I know what it takes. Like, I've spent the last 13 years learning and figuring things out, and I'm not perfect by any means. There's always something to learn in the field of government contracting because it's always evolving. So the goal of Govcon Winners is to help small business owners learn how to find, bid, and win profitable federal contracts. They really need to understand that. And so I work with companies one-on-one, and I have a boot camp, an 8-week boot camp. So that's the kind of the situation with all the companies.
So you certainly had an emphasis on the word profitable.
Yes.
So is there some aspirational bids that go out there? I think people just trying to win contracts maybe, and they end up getting burnt, or they end up passing through costs that weren't originally scoped over to the government payer. Like, what's the ecosystem like there?
All of the above. Government contracting is this very interesting space. And it's interesting in the sense that you would think, well, you said you're an entrepreneur, you're talking about government work, isn't profit like a no-brainer? No, it isn't with government. And here's why. Because of strategy. So sometimes a firm may be open to winning a contract where they break even, or maybe they receive a 1% profit. And it's not because the contract's $100 million. It's because maybe it's part of a long-term strategy. Maybe they want past performance with said agency so it gets them prepared for another contract, or maybe because they have hundreds of employees, and you still can be considered a small business and have hundreds of employees, for those of you listening. So maybe they have hundreds of employees, so 1% added up is still meets the requirement that they have financially. And then you have those where they may take it at a loss because maybe they don't really know what they're doing, or maybe they did so because, again, it's part of some long-term strategy. And so it's a very interesting space, and it's a space where the government will ask you, it's not uncommon for them to ask you to break down your pricing and to identify what your profit is.
Okay. So bumps and bruises along the way. It sounds like you may have acquired some, just like all of us in our entrepreneurial ventures. What's the major lessons learned from going into this? Give me your top one or two.
Scammers. The major lesson is around scammers.
Oh, I thought you said hammers. I was just like, well, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, I guess.
Scammers.
Scammers.
So many scammers. I mean, I really have, I'm this dual kind of person where I'm such a Gemini, where I have this skeptical side and I kind of come off like, oh, and I'm really nice and sweet. I promise you I am. Then I have this side where I'm like, oh, everything is so rosy. That like Midwest, like, hey, how are you doing? Do you want a casserole? Like that side is there too, right? So I came across this gentleman and they were like, hey, I would love for you to be involved in this opportunity because I had inroads. And it ended up like an American Greed where I received the first payment, because that's always on American Greed, right? You get their first payment, right? And then after that, it was like crickets and excuses, and I never received the rest of my money. And I realized that scamming in the federal space was very, very common, that there were people who just did things that I had no idea that they would do. There's way more scams too. There's this portal called sam.gov, and they had issues with people scamming right before COVID, and they had to make changes. And that's been the biggest lesson learned, is you really have to do your due diligence, because it doesn't matter. Like the person who scammed me could have been my like grandfather. This person went through many hurdles to scam me. Yeah. And so it's just something to be aware of. And this isn't unique to the federal government. It's just, I think, because we get so caught up in wanting to run our business or just being a good person or doing what it is that you do, that we sometimes forget, oh man, we got to be aware of these scammers too.
Yeah, it's interesting. In martial arts, I've come across the term of a dedicated opponent, right? There's people who are, may think that they want to get into an altercation, and then once it starts, maybe they back away from it. Oh, it's not worth my time. It's not worth my effort. But what is your level of training against a dedicated opponent? And in this case, somebody who really wants to scam you, probably as a dedicated opponent, if they make it their mission, it's going to be hard not to, or at least it's going to be hard to get away, for sure.
Yeah. And now thankfully, I'm way more alert and aware. However, there was a new one that happened. And luckily we caught it, but we had someone, for those of you who may have employees, and especially if you have employees across this amazing country, we had someone who never worked for us file an unemployment claim in the great state of Ohio. And they almost paid it.
Why is Ohio significant in it, or is it just happen to be where they were?
It happened to be Ohio. I think this person found our information on Facebook based on the way they described the company. I purposely put something kind of different on Facebook, and they were processing it because the lag time. So that person was in Ohio. They filed the unemployment claim. I'm here in Florida. So by the time the mail came, and we contacted them, they were like, oh, well, we were about to pay it. They never even worked for us.
Wow. Yeah, there's
And
people. That's crazy.
yeah, it's nuts. That's nuts. So I
So
guess you're a dedicated opponent.
dedicated opponent. So you're out there in the world right now. You've got, how has COVID impacted these businesses? I mean, it seems like, is Govcon Winners fairly new? Did it spin up
Yeah.
during COVID? So like, take me through that thought process. And then what did you see about the market that you had to bring this company to bear?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, COVID, if anything, COVID reinforced to our federal clients that we are a partner. That no matter if we were virtual or a little bit in person and also virtual, that we are dedicated and we are here to do anything that you want. So like, for instance, one of our clients, my entire team has to dial in every morning at 8:30. Every morning, 8:30, they have to dial in for kind of like a roll call. And that to me is dedication, because some of them don't live on Eastern time.
Yeah.
So, and it's like and so my team, they don't complain. They're amazing. So it hasn't had an impact on us negatively. As far as GovCon Winners, it was just, I really saw that need. Like as I was going through everything with COVID, I attended government outreach events, which is very important in this space. I talked to people in the government, which is very important in this space, and I still responded to proposals, which is important in this space. And I would come across people virtually, like we would attend a virtual conference and connect with each other, and they would say the following: oh my gosh, man, I wish we could have in-person events again. I'm not able to get any work. I can't see anyone. Here's the deal. The government doesn't just, unless the government shuts down, they're still active. COVID, no COVID. They were still buying and doing what the government does. And so I listened to that person thinking, wow, the mindset is off, because we won a 6-figure contract during COVID. We won other work too. We had no problem getting in contact with people. And so I thought, man, there really needs to be some kind of boot camp and offering, because so many really started to enter the space during COVID, especially around PPE, personal protective equipment, yeah. and other reasons, because the government pays. And so you don't have to worry about that. And so I just became concerned, because I was like, this is a myth. You don't have to see the government person. You don't have to go to a conference. I mean, there are many times I went to conferences and never picked up any kind of work. So therefore, I decided to start GovCon Winners to really help small businesses so that they could learn from a person who not only has all of these contracts, but we're still actively bidding on contracts.
And in this space, are you kind of training your competition as well? Are you teaching snakes to bite you?
Hey, I'm okay with that.
I love it.
Because they have something that I know, because we all have something unique, and all of my genius is here. You can't mirror that. You can't mimic that. I don't have a twin. And so it just doesn't happen. Like, so they may pick up things, they may mimic many of the things, and all I want for them is to be successful and to win contracts. If they decide to go off and teach their own approach, well, that's great. It's like those who try and mirror and mimic Amazon. It works to a point, but every organization is different. Every product and service is different. So, and lastly, there's so much work. That's the cool thing about this space. There's so many government contractors, and there's so much work out there that I'm like, there's enough for all of us. I have this mentality of abundance.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think there's that abundance mentality that, that we're raising the water level for everyone. Even if somebody were to beat you out on a contract, what are they offering? How did they frame it? Like, what is the opportunity to learn there and then get better every day? And it's like, it really does help, the totality of everyone. Right. And we are technically the government. Right. And so
we are.
So this is a great opportunity for folks to get involved in, engaged in, and learn a lot about, since I don't know, it's quite a bit of GDP as well, I imagine.
Yes.
Hey, I want to pivot a little bit to this book, and I mentioned it in the intro. Let me read the title again. Managing diversity in the militaries, the value of inclusion in a culture of uniformity. Um, that's a lot. I think that kind of subtitle there, the value of inclusion in a culture of uniformity. When we look at the military, we typically look at uh, uniform. We look at the um, I don't know. It's hard for me to kind of pick the words here, but it's, there's an intensity around military. There's a sameness. They're creating a product, right? When people go through military training. Talk to me a little bit about the underpinning of the book. Why was it written, and then what is the value of inclusion in a culture of uniformity?
Yeah. This book, this is definitely a labor of love. It's definitely a labor of love. So at the time when this was constructed, it was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was overturned. It was before like the Obama administration.
So that was Don't Ask, Don't Tell was 08 or 2010, something like that.
Something like that.
2010 maybe.
It was like it was before all of that. And my biggest client at the time was involved in getting prepared for Don't Ask, Don't Tell to be overturned. And then they were involved in this diversity committee that I ended up getting involved in. So at that particular time, there was a lot of talk in the Department of Defense space around, we need more visible diversity. We need to be more inclusive. But then at the same time, we have these policies in place, not only about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but around who's promoted, which types of positions, just using kind of layman terms, positions and paths lead to becoming a general or becoming an admiral or just obtaining these senior positions that are also could potentially be discriminatory. And so as I was kind of going through this, I thought, wow, we really should have a book, an edited book, because, my academic background, let's have this edited book where we talk about these different areas around diversity and inclusion in the military, because, big picture, they're socialized to be one, right? So it's like this duality of like, well, I'm supposed to fall in line, but then you want to value my inclusion.
Yeah.
You want to be inclusive, and you want to value my differences, and you want me to bring my whole person to work and all of that. And so I thought, well, we really need to explore this, because that's extremely challenging, especially with the different regulations that were in place at the time. And so that's how this all came about. And I think it's such a full circle moment, because these same discussions are being had today, even with the changes, even with all of the knowledge around knowing the different positions that lead to becoming a flag officer. And so it's this thing it can be very challenging to really want to and dive into all that's needed to be inclusive, because you have this beautiful human element in there. And so it adds for a very intriguing kind of journey.
Yeah, it's certainly the military has expanded to include so many ancillary services than like direct trench warfare and battle, right? I mean, there's a certainly a business around it. There's cybersecurity. There's all kinds of like different aspects now of what the military is. I think fundamentally that kind of it has to change, or maybe has to shift our perspective of how we look at it. Is the diversity and inclusion like, and I'm just be frank, I mean, there's obviously straight, white, and male is typically the archetype of what has been in the military for a long time, or at least from a Don't Ask, Don't Tell, prior Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you would assume. Like, what ground has been made since Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Or is that something that you speak on or talk about at all? Or is that something that's kind of evolved outside of what you've been doing with your business?
I mean, it's definitely evolved. It's evolved where they're more first occurring, you know, first female general for this, or first Black female, or first, you know, pilot for this. There are definitely a lot of first to happen. There's way more conversation around diversity and inclusion. The thing that's just, I mean, in my opinion, and this is not unique to Department of Defense, this is for anyone and everyone, and that is, you have this human element, and you have just where research has shown that, you know, if you're wanting to discriminate and you're that type of a person, or you're racist and may not realize it, or may not want to vocalize it, then there's not really much that can be had. There's only so much that can really be done to change beliefs. And so it's much larger than just, oh, we're going to have you go through a training, or we're going to have a diversity position, or look, now we have a Black female general. I mean, it's much bigger than that. There's a lot more that needs to happen. But then at the same time, it's like, you know, maybe some people don't want things to happen. And I'm not trying to say somebody's like anti-inclusion and diversity. I'm just saying that we're talking about power, influence, and impact. And so it's really hard for some, because they think it's a zero-sum game, and they think that they're going to lose something. And again, this is not just the federal government. This is in all organizations I'm speaking about, because we serve both. And so that's where the challenge comes in. And then here come the excuses, like, well, because, well, like, and then that happens. There's a lot of these kind of statements, like, it's kind of like how the world was before COVID, right? Oh, you can't work from home. Like, you have to be here. Okay, granted, I get it. Like, if you're selling hamburgers, I don't know if you can work from home necessarily. I got it to a point, right? But we have
that's a great comparison. There's these kind of like social barriers, or kind of like invisible walls that all of a sudden now it's commonplace to work a 10-hour day in your pajamas at your house. And certainly you're just as productive, or arguably more productive in some jobs, having the opportunity to walk into your kitchen and get right back to work, those types of things. Right. So there's benefits, right? There's
benefits, and we all proven that you can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you may not have liked it. I get it. But it's been proven. And so the same holds true for diversity and inclusion. Is at this point in time, people can still hold on to the, well, but you can't, you know, they can still hold on to excuses. And so as a result, it's going to be this ongoing conversation, and it's just going to continue on, because unfortunately just how we are as human beings. And preference rules, and when people put importance on preference and they're in positions to favor, then that's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think there's it's interesting, because it's like, as I was prepping for this podcast, I was thinking, like, what is the argument against, right? I mean, how can you faction an argument against including people from different walks of life and different perspectives into this force that supports and so much of what our infrastructure is in the US and globally. I think what the thread that I was able to pull was, and hang with me as I'm the devil advocate here. In a recent US military brief in December of last year, one of the recommendations was to remove aptitude test barriers that adversely impact diversity. Now, I think that there's one lens that you could look at that and say, hey, that's really great. Right. And then there's another lens that you look at it and say, well, now we're changing tests. So like, how do you speak to like the perception, or like, how do you unpack something like that? And what aptitude tests negatively impact inclusion and diversity based on your experience? Or is that something you could speak to?
I would put out there that often the flashlight is being flashed in the wrong spot.
Oh.
And in that type of situation is what I believe has happened, where there tends to be a lot of diversity in the services, and you want to include Coast Guard, because Coast Guard is under Homeland Security.
Yeah.
So under all of the services collectively, usually you have a lot of racial diversity with the enlisted side and not so much on the officer side. And and as well as with the academies. So the real, in my opinion, some of the real issues have to deal with these barriers to entry around academies and obtaining more officers, more diverse officers. So that would be through junior ROTC, the academies, as well as those who are in college, whether they're not in ROTC, or those who are soon to be graduating. And that's where the focus, in my opinion, should lie, as well as looking at the paths to promotion, because many want to stay in, but because of different obstacles and maybe being singled out or not feeling included, they may only serve 4 years or 5 years or 10 years instead of serving 30 or trying to get to the highest rank that they believe is possible or is possible given their education background as well as their interest. And so I suggest looking at this bigger ecosystem opposed to flashing the light where you already know what's there and it has no bearing on this. Because often, you know, like just one example for the academies, and I think this is for West Point and maybe it changed, so I could be wrong, please look this up. I believe you need to have, you have to have a local politician refer you. It's either, it's like a legislator or senator. You have to have a politician, I think, write you a letter or how to refer you to get in. So how am I supposed to do that?
Yeah.
You know, and so, and I'm not suggesting this shouldn't be the case. And again, look into it, you know, but there's these, again, there are these barriers. So it's like, okay, well, how am I going to make this work? Or, you know, how am I going to figure this out? And how am I don't even know if I knew this. Or if you have someone who has multiple offers, you know, of any kind of background, why should they go to West Point over Notre Dame? Oh gosh, I hate Notre Dame. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know why I said Notre Dame. But Michigan, University of Michigan. Why would they go to West Point over University of Michigan? Go Wolverines. Why would they do that?
Go blue.
I know. Like, so it's like, you know, so you have those moments too, where it's like, well, I mean, so it's just, it's very challenging. Very challenging.
But I think what I'm hearing is there are a lot of opportunities to look at the current state of the way people flow through government positions, whether that's military or otherwise, and really understand where they're coming from to where they're going to, the opportunities that they have to grow within those branches. And is it really fair? Is it really, are we all trying to hurdle the same way?
Right.
Essentially. Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. I appreciate so much your perspective and obviously your clear expertise on the subject matter. Just something I wanted to ask you, especially in light of, I know there was a commercial. I saw the Army Times recently, like disabled comments on a commercial. There's a female soldier who grew up with 2 moms, and you know, there's been some politicians that have come out and kind of, you know, there are some people that certainly, and you know, again, as I'm empathetic to their perspective, a foreign nation looking at that commercial, and then they paired it, I think, in some parodies against like what the Russian troops are doing. And it's like, you know, hey, there's this like intensity, whatever. And then on this other side, there's flowers and butterflies, good, bad, or indifferent. It shows, hey, we're like, I think it's a step in the right direction personally, that, hey, we're the military is not for one archetype of an individual. I think at the same time, it's hard to adjust for other people to look at that as weak. And so there is a balance there. And certainly I would hate to pretend that there isn't merit to both sides.
Right. I mean, there is. I mean, it definitely has that kind of duality. And And at the end of the day, the services need recruits. And if you continue to exhaust your existing pool, then you're going to have to open it up. And recruiting numbers are largely based on what's going on in the economy. And today, I mean, many businesses can't find talent.
Yeah.
So if businesses can't find talent, I don't think it's because people have raised their hand to join the military.
I would agree. I would agree with you there.
So and I always suggest to people, the military and working for the federal government are two areas that are often largely overlooked and are amazing opportunities for you if that's what you want to do. And so, so then it takes them to this next level. I do want to add, just a little thing of humor. If you're into humor, maybe you're not, maybe you don't like to laugh. But there's this great website, the Duffel Blog. You totally need to go to the Duffel Blog. It is hilarious. And they have funny like military stories. It's kind of like The Onion meets Army Times. So please
That's so awesome.
Go there, the Duffel Blog. It's hilarious. You definitely will laugh. You might get offended, but just laugh.
I love it. And I think the most important thing when we talk about government agencies, specifically branches of the military, we're American. Like,
yeah,
when it really boils down to it, this is the very diverse country, whether some people see it or not. And, it's very, very important that we all just kind of work together and just try to figure out how to exist in a way that best supports the people that live in this country. And of course, being a global leader as well, which is the way we've positioned ourselves. So again, thank you for your expertise and entertaining the conversation here. Hey, I got one more kind of topic area I want to touch on with you, which was adult fluent.
Yeah.
You've got a podcast. It's cool. Like, what are you trying to do with this thing? Like, you've got so much stuff going on. And I didn't even talk about the podcast in the intro, but like, what is Adult Fluent, and who are you trying to reach and why?
So during COVID, well, I knew I wanted to put out a podcast, and during COVID, I was like, I'm just going to do it. So I batched a ton of episodes, and the intent initially, I thought, oh, wow, this would be for young people who are trying to adult, and I'll have these inspirational stories of people who are going through adulting themselves, meaning, talk about their careers, talk about trials and tribulations, talk about depression, all of those things. And as time has gone on and I looked at my numbers, I realized, wow, many of the listeners are over 30. And apparently adulting is something that you're forever working on, that it's not like you just reach 35 and you're like, yes, check that box, I adulted well, right? It's like this ongoing thing. And so I've started to change it up a bit, where I've interviewed, like, for instance, Mr. Houseplant, who's amazing and he's killing it on TikTok. So I interviewed him about houseplants and how to keep them alive. So I've kind of shifted a little bit, where I'm interviewing people who can teach something that's still involved with adulting. So finance, things with the home, probably more fitness, is where I'm looking to go, and then to grow it from there.
Yeah.
That was kind of my thing. But then, okay, so this is like hot news, because I haven't really shared this publicly with anyone.
Let's do it. Woo!
So now I'm at this place where, like, I don't even know. And so now I'm at this place of like looking for happiness in my personal, like my life, just my personal life, just my life, Kizzy's life, right? So I don't know now what's going to happen with Adult Fluent, because I don't know what's going on here. And so I know that I love Adult Fluent, has amazing episodes. I have so many more to release, but I don't know what's going to happen. It's like to be continued, ...
I love that. And to share in that this podcast, like, this was created out of COVID, me being at home. I spent 8 years on airplanes, basically, as a consultant. I was flying all around the country, and I missed talking to people on airplanes. And I would just essentially interview people all the time about their lives, just because I'm a curious person. And, for me, it's like, I don't really have an end game to it. I get asked all the time, like, hey, what are you trying to do with it? I don't know. I just want to talk to really interesting people like Kizzy Parks, talk about military diversity and inclusion, right? Like, I don't know. It does scratch an itch inside of me. And it's really important to sit alongside yourself and have that conversation. Like, what is this? Am I happy doing it? Is it the way that I'm pushing it out now, or is it different? So I love that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, because I don't know. And I think it might evolve to like crypto, because that's become my thing right now. So I'm like, does Adult Fluent just then focus on crypto topics? I have no idea anymore.
Yeah, the podcast is going to release before this one is very crypto and NFT heavy, so it should be a really good one. It's a hot topic. Interesting changes happening in the world, Kizzy, for sure.
Yes, Jake. Oh my gosh, it's nuts.
Before we part ways here, anything that we didn't touch on that's worth noting? People know that you've got upcoming, anything like that? And then also, where's the best place to find you, online or otherwise?
I would say, okay, so you got to check this out on my Instagram or LinkedIn. I not too long ago set a Guinness World Record.
Well, what is that? I saw that, and it's in your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So good old, let's see, Guinness World Records. You can attempt a world record. They have so many different kinds of world records, like longest nails, eating things.
Yeah.
I chose jump rope. So my record is for most skips of a rope in 60 seconds while wearing flip-flops.
Oh, wow.
So at 182, so more than 3 a second.
That is have you been a lifelong jump roper?
I've jumped rope for a long time.
that is a heck of a skill. I would just trip and slap my toes with the rope. That's
did a lot of
that. When did you set this record?
May 1st.
So just recently.
Yeah.
Wow. What was the previous record?
I think 70.
Nah, you shattered it.
Yeah.
That is, Kizzy, that is awesome. I will, is there a video of it out there?
There is. There's a video on my LinkedIn.
Okay.
So, and that's the best way to connect with me is just DM me on LinkedIn, say you heard me on the podcast. And I have some clips, I have some images on my Instagram. You can DM me on my Instagram too, Kizzy M. Parks on LinkedIn. You can't, there's a couple of us, but the blonde one, that's
okay.
me.
You know what? I will put some links in the podcast as well to both your LinkedIn profile and the video. And I hope people take the time to go check it out. Dr. Kizzy Parks, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Cheers.